So I really enjoy having these deep philosophical conversations with my oldest son. He's 11. And the other day we were at his brother's basketball practice, and he was a little bored because, like his father, he's not exactly into the sports ball. So during practice, we were sort of talking about, the nature of reality and the existence of aliens and whether or not we have free will, the possibility that time is just a highly convincing neurological illusion that helps us navigate this reality where every moment of our lives has been predetermined and the beginning, the middle, and the end have already been written, and our life is simply a movie playing out. Just a normal father and son type conversations, right? And so the entire time we're having this sort of deep conversation, I could tell that there was this young lady sitting next to us, and she was kind of listening in on our conversation, right? And so after about 15 minutes of this, she finally gathered up the courage to kind of chime in and say that she was a philosophy student. And she thought it was really cool that we were talking about this type of stuff, that I was talking to my kid about this type of thing. And I always tell my kids it's sort of wise to get other people's perspectives on things in order to, expand our minds and worldview and to come into a more informed position on these types of things. And so I wanted to lead by example. So I turned to this young lady and I asked her if she was familiar with Einstein's theory on minding your own business.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
Hello, my fellow misfits. Welcome back to the cult. Super good to see you again. Before we dive into today's topic of the phenomenon, do me a quick hot fave, will you, and hit like or subscribe or give me a little thumbs up. Give me some sort of action here. I would really appreciate it. Whenever I'm watching YouTube videos, I always forget to give the creators a thumbs up and let them know that I'm enjoying their content. So this is just a little friendly reminder. If you like what I'm doing here and want to support me, that's a perfect way to do it. So hi, good to see you. I've been sort of putting off doing this episode because it seems big in my mind. Like there's a lot to talk about. It's a huge topic. The phenomenon, meaning, if you're not familiar with the topic, the phenomenon is what UFO nerds refer to as, all the alien weird shit. So we're going to talk about UFOs and UAPs and interdimensional beings and disclosure and just all the fun things, right? When I first started diving into this topic, this all happened around the pandemic, right? Where I just started questioning things. I started looking into power structures. I started looking into the government. I started looking into conspiracy theories. Dove real deep down a lot of rabbit holes. And one of those topics was aliens, right? I'd always been a fan of the X-Files and sci-fi. I got the Starship Enterprise tattoo on my bicep, so real big fan. And I always, I was always open to the possibility, and it was kind of fun to think about. Like, yeah, of course, there's probably aliens out there, right? Like, it's a big universe. There's billions and billions of galaxies that are filled with billions and billions of planets that are likely filled with billions and billions of intelligent life forms, just like us, right? Just like these fellas standing behind me right now. They look real, they look real warm and friendly, don't they? So I was always open to the idea, and I was certain that they were out there somewhere. And yes, I know that there's some weirdos that talked about, like alien encounters and just all the weird stuff, right? And so I thought, like, yeah, okay, fine. I'd listen to Art Bell back in the day on the radio. Yes, radio used to be a thing, guys. Remember that? So I was always open to the possibility, but around the pandemic, around 2000, I'm sorry, around 2020, time is an illusion, by the way. I started diving down the alien rabbit hole. And anytime I dive into any topic, whether it's a tinfoil hat topic or just a more, um, uh, what am I trying to say? Just any topic, right? Any old topic. I like to get everybody's opinion, like I said in the intro here, where I'll listen to the tinfoil hat people, I'll listen to the nut jobs, but I also want to listen to the academics. I want to listen to the scientists. I want to listen to people in power. I want to listen to people that had experiences with whatever it is that I'm looking into. And that's what I did. Went down many of those rabbit holes, and I wanted to hear what everybody had to say. And then, like I teach my kids, come to my own conclusions, right? I don't want anybody swaying me one way or the other. I want to look at all the evidence, determine if it's hogwash or not, or if it holds weight, and then come to my own conclusions. And so I didn't know what to do for this episode because it's a huge topic once you start getting into it, and I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert or anything, but I find it fascinating. And so maybe you find it interesting, or you find yourself wondering, like, maybe there life out there. What's the deal with all this UFO, UAP stuff? It's starting to leak into the mainstream now with Congress talking about disclosure, and the new movie that's everybody's talking about called The Age of Disclosure on Amazon Prime. So if you're interested in this topic, I definitely suggest you watch that. Um, but yeah, let's just sort of dive into it. When I started looking into these things, it started becoming overwhelming because I found that the more that I started looking into it, we're going to get into details here. I'm just sort of giving you a little preamble to let you know like where I'm coming from and how I sort of started diving into this topic. Um, it gets overwhelming very quickly because everybody has an opinion. And what I like to do when I'm looking into topics like this is just look for patterns. I like to see what most people are talking about. It's like the Great Flood, right? It's all the ancient cultures talk about a great flood. That's a pattern. So it very likely is that there was a great flood at some point, a great cataclysm in our recent history, 13,000 years being recent, geologically speaking, right? So I look for the patterns to see what most people are talking about. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So it was very overwhelming because once I got to the bottom of these rabbit holes, I was even more confused than when I started, right? Because I expected to come to conclusions. I expected to have answers. I expected to sort of have a foundation of belief that I could sort of build my thoughts on, and that didn't really exist. And that was very frustrating for me. And then I would put it down for a little bit and come back to it a few months later and dive into it again and listen to the podcasts and read the books and do all the things. And I found myself very confused still. Like, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is I think that that's the general underlying theme here, is that nobody really truly knows what's going on. And we'll dive into disclosure a little bit deeper, disclosing what the government knows or doesn't know. But I think the overall theme here is that nobody has all of the answers, right? The government doesn't know all of the answers. These people that have had these encounters with the beings or the phenomenon don't have the answers. I think that everybody has a little bit and a little piece of the puzzle. And what I'm trying to do, and what many people like myself are trying to do, is to take these puzzle pieces and just try to put them together and sort of figure out like what the hell's going on around here with this so-called phenomenon, right? And so everything sort of gets lumped under this umbrella of the phenomenon, or lumped under the umbrella of just calling all of this aliens, right? Or just calling them all UFOs. And I think part of that might be a disinformation campaign from segments of the government that are trying to confuse the populace, and there's evidence to that. I like to be clear when there's evidence, and I like to be clear when I'm just making shit up, and this is my own my own theory, right? So there's a lot of evidence that the government is out there trying to muddy the water, right? Because they don't want us to know the truth, and I think that's clear just to the layman that doesn't know anything about the phenomenon at all. So for my conclusions, I don't think it's just one thing. I think after diving in, I have concluded that it's three things. And let's talk about it. At this point, I wish I had an infographic to throw up, but just picture it in your head, guys. I think there's three things going on here. And the first thing that I think is going on is there are non-human entities on the planet as we speak. This is from eyewitness testimony. This is from government testimony. Like in the Age of Disclosure movie that just came out recently, which lends a lot of weight to what I'm talking about in my own eyes personally, is that there's all these high level government officials, Marco Rubio, there's these high level military people, these admirals, these commanders, these captains in the Air Force. And if you talk to these military people, they'll tell you they see this shit all the time. They see these UFOs, which that they now refer to as UAPs because it sounds less woo woo and little green men, and UAPs meaning unidentified aerial phenomenon, just like weird shit in the sky that we can't identify, right? But if you talk to these pilots and you talk to these submarine commanders, they're seeing this weird shit all the time. That's just zooming around them, right? And a lot of times they are tic tac shaped aircraft, like the little white candy, the tic tac. Other times they're reported as flying saucers, like the one that's flying above my head right now. Triangular shaped ones. There's been reports of ones that are as large as an aircraft carrier, right? By airplane pilots, by just regular old cargo pilots, right? There's these craft that are zooming all around us at in ways that defy physics as we know it. There are crafts on sonar under the water that these submarines are detecting that are traveling at 500 miles per hour, around 500 knots, which defies physics as we know it. These submarine commanders and these legitimate scientists are saying, like, we don't know of any technology that can do that. It literally defies physics. These craft are shown on video, shown on radar, shown on like legitimate, um, scientific apparatus that show that these craft can go in and out of mediums with no problem whatsoever. And by mediums, I mean between air and sea, air and water, go through buildings, go through trees with no problem whatsoever. They can, there's been reports of these UAPs that are at sea level, and then they're reported at, being at 30,000 feet instantaneously, that they're traveling at speeds that create 9,000 Gs, gravitational forces, where any human being or any being as we know it based on physics could not survive inside of a craft like that. There's also reports of orbs. Now, these reports of orbs have been happening for hundreds or thousands of years, right? And this is what I like to do is look at the patterns. I like to look at the patterns of not just modern day interpretations, but these things have been reported for thousands of years. That's what's very interesting to me, right? So there's these orbs, which if you follow me on Instagram or on Twitter, I post lots of content on there as well. So if you're interested, go over there and follow me. I saw some weird glowing orange orbs on my walk home a few months ago, and I recorded it so you can check it out. And I don't know what they were. I'm not saying they were aliens, or I'm not saying they were interdimensional beings, but they were weird, and they weren't moving like a normal craft, and they didn't have lights like a normal aviation aircraft would have in the United States with, the red and the green aviation lights, the white lights. Like, it was weird. And I'm not the only one that's seen this type of thing, right? So my first theory is that there are interdimensional beings on this planet, non-physical beings on this planet. I'm not talking about the bros behind me. Hey, bros. But I'm talking about non-physical beings. And what you can lump into this category are things that start to get into the spiritual realm, right? Where now we're talking about spirits. Now we're talking about jinn, if in the Quran, or you're talking about angels or demons or interdimensionals, this sort of thing, right? Gods with a lower G, perhaps, maybe even gods with an uppercase G. Like, this is the type of thing that I think has been interacting with humanity since the very beginning, right? That are from the other realm, the other side, from the fifth dimension, perhaps, or from the heavenly realms, or whatever label you want to put on it. I think that they have the ability to come into our realm. The way that I think about it, and the way that I've had physicists explain it to me on YouTube, is that it's a dimensional thing. So, in the same way that we are currently in the third dimension, um, perhaps even in the fourth dimension with the element of time, right? But let's not get too crazy here. In the same way that our shadows are in the two dimension, if you're living in a two-dimensional shadow realm, just for example's sake, it's impossible for you to imagine a realm that's in third dimension, right? That has height and depth, etc. And so I think what's happening with these interdimensional beings and many of these craft and orbs that we don't quite understand, that defy physics as our human brains comprehend it, I think that they're entering our realm in the same way that I've had it described as we enter another realm when a submarine goes down into the water, into the lower depths, right? Where we're in a realm that we're not originally from, and we're interacting interacting with it in a way that will seem crazy to the creatures that are of that realm. And so, if we can't physically and mentally comprehend these other realms, other than in an abstract or symbolic type way, that's what I think is going on here. I think that we can't. It's not that we're not smart enough. We're literally not wired as a species to comprehend these higher realms in the same way that an ant can't comprehend algebra, no matter how hard they study, no matter all the geniuses within the ant colony, the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the Einsteins of the ant world, still can't wrap their minds around what's going on. They try to apply mathematics to it to try to figure it out. They try to apply science to it. They try to apply religion to it. They try to apply spirituality to it. And no matter how hard we try, We're just throwing human words and human concepts as something that we literally can't comprehend. In the same way that I believe that we literally can't comprehend what God is. We label it as spirit or creator or a god or a king, but I think that these are all just flimsy words to describe something we can't comprehend, right? So that's what I think is going on here. So I think that these higher beings have the ability to come into our realm or our dimension, um, with the use of these crafts, right? The Hindus talked about it. All of the ancient religions talk about it in some form or another. The Bible talks about it. And of course, you can put a modern day UFO alien spin on it. But I think what we're doing here is talking about the same phenomenon. I think that something is visiting us here, right? In the ancient texts, the Bible and the Book of Enoch. Well, the Book of Enoch was left out of the Bible for mysterious reasons, but that's for another day. In the Book of Enoch, they talk about the Watchers, that God had these watchers on planet Earth to look after and protect humanity. And some of these watchers were fallen angels, quote unquote, and they mated with the lowly humans that they were meant to protect. And as a result, they created these bastardized, monstrous, disgusting giants that were born of the watcher human relations. And that is what the Nephilim are, right? So there's been this idea and this concept of these creatures that we don't quite understand for quite some time. And I think that the watchers or angels or fallen angels or demons all sort of fall into this category. And perhaps when humanity's interacted with these boys behind me, that it's reasonable to call those things demons. They're terrifying looking, right? They're scary looking and they're unknown to us. And so, of course, we would call those evil and call those demons. But I think that that's too simplistic to just throw the label of demon on everything that we don't understand, right? And I think that oftentimes religious folks, fundamentalist Christians specifically, I've talked to several of them in my family and those that I know, and I'm not mocking them by any means or their belief systems, but in my opinion, I believe that too often they just they categorize everything that they don't understand or that they're scared of as just it's of the devil, it's demonic, don't look at it, right? So that's the first category thing that I think is happening under the umbrella of phenomenon that's going on here is there are non-physical beings that are on this planet that are interacting with us and have been for quite some time. The second thing that I think is going on in tandem with this is there are non-human intelligences that are physical on this planet. I think that that includes these fellows behind me here, the gray aliens, the Zeta Reticuli, the whatever you want to call them. I think they're here, and I think that there is an avalanche of evidence that is pointing to the fact that these guys have been here for quite some time. You look back at ancient art on the caves. The Aboriginals were painting depictions of these gray aliens behind me on rocks and caves and boulders. The Navajo tribes in the Americas were talking about these beings. They called them the ant people. There are jungle tribesmen that have specific names for these creatures as well. So for me, there's this pattern in the same way that the Great Flood, everybody's talking about the same creature here with different names. We're all talking about the same being. That's interesting to me, right? Which lends credence to the fact that they may be here. Now, with all these things, this entire episode, this entire topic, I'm not 100% convinced about anything. I'm open to anything and everything. I'm open to Bigfoot. I personally don't think Bigfoot exists, but if I were provided with fact, if I saw one with my own two eyes, I'd be like, okay, well, there you go. I guess there's Bigfoot, right? So with all of these things, I'm not trying to convince you or convince myself. I find it all interesting and I'm open to it, and my thoughts and patterns shift as I get more and more evidence. That's why I love talking about it and listening to more and more people talk about it and hear their perspectives and opinions and shift mine, based on that, right? So there's been so many talks for decades of abductions by these gray aliens. And there's also been weird cattle mutilations and reports of farmers. And, this is back when I was in my X-Files days, back before I dove into this stuff. I was like, yeah, cattle mutilation, that's wacky, that's weird. Who can explain it? Big question mark, right? Like, yeah, gray aliens, probably, maybe. I don't know. That's crazy. But as I started diving into it, I was like, oh shit, this is real. Like, there's a lot of people that are reporting this stuff, right? These cattle mutilations are weird. The weird thing is that they are mutilating them in a surgically precise way. They're removing the tongue, the eyeballs, the genitals, specific parts of the body, and they're drained completely of blood. These animals that are being mutilated, mostly cattle, are being completely drained of their blood. And there's no blood on the scene of the crime, right? That's the weird thing is if you're draining an animal of all of its blood, if a human is doing it, where'd all the blood go? How come there's zero drips of blood anywhere on the ground, right? Another weird thing about these cattle mutilations is almost always the ground is sort of uh, desecrated. Is that the right word? No. It's sullied, right? Where normally, if an animal dies in the woods, of course, the entire creature is devoured by Mother Nature, right? The carnivores will eat the meat, and the bugs will eat the bones, and eventually everything just disappears within a matter of weeks. If an animal dies in the woods, that's the natural process. But these cattle mutilations, what's weird about it is nothing will touch the bones or the meat. So the cattle that's been mutilated will just lie there in the field and nothing will touch it because they, for whatever reason, right? It's weird. Okay. And then we can talk about the abductions, which I always kind of, like I said, I listened to Art Bell and watched all the wacky movies and stuff. And I was like, yeah, maybe that's kind of weird, I guess, right? Probably, I don't know. But now I'm convinced that it's a thing. And oftentimes the theme of all of these stories is that the gray aliens will take them up into the craft, and that it'll have something to do with what's the word I'm looking for, like they care about our eggs and our sperm, right? So it has to do with our genetics, and it has to do with perhaps cloning or something wacky like that, right? But they're very interested in our DNA and recreation purposes, and so I find that very interesting. And the leading theories nowadays amongst UFO nerds like myself are that these beings, the gray aliens behind us, like from Roswell, um, are future humans, right? That somehow over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, that this is eventually what we evolve into. I've listened to evolutionary biologists, like legit scientists, talking about how after hundreds of thousands or millions of years, it's very likely that we will evolve into creatures that could very well look like this, especially on the path that we're heading towards transhumanism and the merging of our biological human body with technology, right? Because another theme that is often heard amongst people who have interactions with these grays behind us is that they're very cold. They're very neutral, and there's not an into like they don't really have a soul is sort of what is insinuated, right? They speak telepathically. There's often this theme, whether it's the interdimensional beings I mentioned earlier or these gray aliens here, they communicate telepathically, which I find interesting. And I also find it interesting that we're heading on a path of that now technologically in the real world with Elon Musk and Neuralink and this sort of cutting edge technology that's already, as of today, allowing us to communicate telepathically through this technology, right? So imagine how far we've come technologically in just 200 years as a species. It's mind blowing, right? That we had a horse and buggy 200 years ago, and now we have AI and quantum computers, and we're allegedly landing on the moon and on Mars and all of these things. Like it's insane. So perhaps these creatures are us in the future, and we've fully merged technology with our humanity, and this is the result. If we're not as physical anymore, if we just rely on technology wholly, then they have these little spindly arms, and our brain has grown in size. Due to where we live, many of these people report that these aliens lived on craft, fine, but that they also live underground, like the Navajo said with the ant people. And there's also reports that these beings come from the water. There's a thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of reports of these craft emerging from the oceans, right? And from these hot spots globally in these waters. So it's very interesting. So if you move civilization to underwater or underground, then evolutionarily your eyes would grow larger to account for the lack of light or whatever, right? So um just a lot of weird stuff, right? And speaking of technology, It's very interesting that we first started encountering these gray aliens in the modern age around Roswell in the 1940s, right? And this was at the same time that we were discovering and creating nuclear technology for weaponry purposes, obviously. And there was a huge spike in these sightings of these gray aliens around that time and ever since then. And it's very interesting that there were reports from military guys talking about how they were seeing these craft that were just mysteriously hovering over these nuclear test sites and stuff before the sites were even being built, as they were starting to be built, as if these creatures knew what was about to happen, as if they're time travelers, which is another theory of what these craft are. That these craft, the reason that they can defy physics as we know them, is that they're creating some sort of a warp bubble around the craft that allows them to glide in and out of our reality and their reality, or their dimension and our dimension seamlessly, right? Through time travel of sorts. And it gets very over my head with astrophysics and just real deep science stuff, right? So I try to wrap my puny little mind around it as much as I can. But um, there's definitely a time travel component to this, right? And so with this technology, I have always believed that these beings, or some of these beings, whatever they are giving this technology to the humans along the way, right? That the transistor just suddenly appeared, and the internet appears, and all of these technologies that have allowed our us to evolve technologically like this at an exponential rate. And humanity for thousands of years are just plodding along, creating things here and there. And we've always been a creative species and a creative civilization. But around the 20th century, there was a massive spike, and it's just suspicious to me, right? And so there's this theory that I believe in, that these creatures gave us this technology along the way to sort of help us out, to boost us along the way, right? And which especially makes sense if they were future humans. They're trying to get us on the path a little quicker. Like, hey, here, there's this idea that they're leaving us these craft as donations to, like, hey, wink, wink, hint, hint. Here's our craft. Like, figure this shit out. And so there's also this theme, historically, right, and theologically, in all of the ancient texts, there's this theme of the higher beings giving humanity technology or information that we weren't meant to have, right? In the Garden of Eden, there's the tree of knowledge, right, and the snake representing the phenomenon giving us information that we weren't meant to have, saying, hey, God says, hey, you're not allowed to have this. But the snake says, hey, wink, wink, here's a way you should eat this apple to get some information you're not meant to have, right? The idea of Prometheus in the ancient Greek stories, this God that gave humanity fire and gave us technologies that we weren't meant to have. And the gods were pissed off, just like in the Garden of Eden, right? There's the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, where we try to become like the gods and build the towers higher and higher to the heavens. And the gods are like, nope, and smack that tower down, right? There's the book of Enoch, like I talked about earlier, where the Watchers also give humanity technology and information that we weren't meant to have. They give us information about metallurgy and agriculture and medicines and weaponry. And they also mention makeup, which is a little weird, but it's there. Like, we're not meant to have makeup. Okay, fine. I like a little blush now and then. Who's to blame? No. But there's this overlying theme historically of the gods getting pissed off when we are given stuff we're not meant to have. And I think that that's what the internet is. That's what I think social media is. That's what I think quantum computers are. That's what I think AI is. That's what I think all of this stuff is. I don't think we're meant to have it. And the theme and the aftermath of this is there's always some sort of cataclysm. The gods always get real pissed off when we get this information, and there's a big reset that comes. And so whether that's the poles flipping, or a super volcano going off, or a great flood, or a solar flare, or choose your own adventure, I feel like we're on the cusp of this thing. I can just feel this thing that's coming. Some of the more weird, astral travel stuff, and people who can prophets and stuff have predicted that there's an event coming up. People who have interacted with the gray aliens have said that there's an event coming up in our future that they're trying to prepare us for, that sort of thing. And I don't know if it's just pre-programming. I've listened to enough YouTube videos that now I start to believe it, or if that's just my intuition talking, it kind of gets a little blurry there, right? But I just feel like something is coming, a new age, right? We talk about disclosure, we talk about the apocalypse translating to a great revealing. So apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world, but it's a new way of looking at things. Perhaps we have President Trump in office now that is, allegedly supposed to be tearing down the curtains on things like the Epstein files and the JFK, and now everybody's kind of pushing him to talk about aliens and disclosure, which he is kind of tight-lipped about. But I think we're in an age of revealing, right? To see the true structures, to see the true operators behind what's going on, right? Um, what else do I want to talk about before I jump topics here? With these UAPs and these UFOs, I think what's happening is that the governments around the world have recovered these craft. There have been high-level people in the CIA, high-level people in the military who have been in these programs that are whistleblowers that say, "Look, I was on the program that recovers these craft. I've seen them with my own eyes. I've seen these gray beings with my own eyes." And so, are they crackpots? That's up to you to determine, right? These are high-level military people. And from what I understand in the military, um, there's a huge stigma around talking about this shit. You're not just because you're made fun of by your fellow peers, but because you have the possibility of losing your high level clearance. If they start to think you have mental issues, that's a real problem. You might lose your job, you might lose your clearance. And so a lot of these people in the military don't want to whistleblow and don't want to talk about the things that they've seen because they might lose their rank or lose their credibility or lose their high level clearances or top level clearances, right? And that's a real thing. And so it's brave of these whistleblowers to come out and talk about it and say, "I don't care. I think humanity needs to know what I saw. I saw some freaking aliens. I saw these craft." And so that's what they're talking about in Congress now. You can check out those videos if you're interested and determine for yourself if they're lying or not. And the way I think about all of these things is like there are tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands over time of these stories of interactions of people in the military, people in the government, people who've had their own, experiences in the woods or in their backyard or whatever, right? And a percentage of them are lying, sure. Percentage of them were on drugs or something. Okay, sure, fine. Hallucinogens. Okay, fine, fine, fine. But not all of them, right? I can't discount all of them. And that's the thing that leaves this door open for me, right? So what's going on is I believe that ever since Roswell, maybe earlier, but around Roswell in the 40s, we discovered these craft and we determined that we could try to reverse engineer them. And there have been reverse engineering programs ever since then, trying to figure out how the hell these things work, right? Trying to figure out the technology for ourselves for militaristic purposes, obviously, because that's how humans roll. Um, but to try to reverse engineer these things and to remain ahead of our enemies, i.e., Russia and China, et cetera. And so Russia and China are also trying to do the same thing. So I feel like there's this race to try to figure out this technology first, right? I feel like we advanced so quickly from the Wright brothers flying their first plane to jets to, craft that could take us to the moon very rapidly. In less than 100 years, we figured that all out. And so to think that we just sort of flatlined technologically in terms of aviation is a joke. Don't you find it interesting that we just are still flying around in airplanes and jets? Like that's still our mode of transportation after 75 years. Like we haven't really advanced anything beyond that. I find that very hard to believe. So there's a lot of credible evidence that in the 1950s, we cracked the code and figure out anti-gravity systems and that we've been using them ever since on a top secret level. But what's weird to me is if we have this high level technology, why aren't we using it in war? Why aren't we using it against our enemies? Why aren't we using it as the United States to completely dominate the world, as if we kind of aren't already, but in a way that's irrefutable, right? If we had this alien technology, anti-gravitical stuff and warp bubbles that can, have us appear instantaneously over our enemy's capital and destroy them, like why aren't we doing it? And so I think what's going on is we don't know anything. What I think is going on is, yes, I think we have anti-gravity perhaps, and it's sort of top secret, and maybe we're using it, maybe we're not. But um, I think what's happening is the phenomenon, the creatures, the beings have left us these craft or they've crashed or whatever, and we've recovered them. And I think it's the same as giving an iPhone to a caveman. I think that there's no way that that caveman has the intellectual capabilities to figure out the mechanisms that operate that iPhone, right? You can maybe figure out how to turn it on by pushing a button. You can change the volume, maybe. You can sort of open up this screen or that screen, but that's it. There's no way you can recreate it. There's no way you can understand what's going on those circuits. It's beyond their comprehension. And I think that's exactly what's going on with these craft that we've recovered, these reverse engineering programs that we're working on. I think that it's very hard because they're keeping it top secret and it's very isolated from other organizations. And what's going on is that the aviation companies have swept in Northrop Grumman, Boeing, um, just off the top of my head, these top aviation companies have gained access. The government has given them access to this and said, "Hey, we need you to figure this shit out because you're the aviation guys, but I need you guys to keep quiet about it," right? And what that does for the government is um, keeps that layer of secrecy, right? Because if they give all of this technology and outsource it to these aviation companies, then you can't use the Freedom of Information Act to get to the bottom of it because they're private companies. And so these private companies are making billions or trillions of dollars on this technology, this alien technology. I even hate using the word alien because I don't think they're coming from another planet. I think they're already here. That's my whole point is these interdimensionals, these gray aliens. I think they're just here. This is their home. They've been here for a very long time. I don't think they're coming from another solar system. And so these companies are taking advantage of this technology for their own personal use, but also for the governmental technology and national security and all of that stuff, right? So, but I think what part of the big secret is that the governments don't know what the hell they have. I think that they haven't cracked the code. Maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit there, but I don't think in the last 75 years we've figured out what the hell's going on. I think that's part of the big secret. There were those mysterious drones all over the world that showed up. It's predominantly over New Jersey. I don't know if you checked that out or not, but there are these weird car-sized drones that were hovering over New Jersey and over people's neighborhoods and houses for, 12, 16, 24 hours, which we don't have technology that can have a drone hover for that long, as far as we know, right? So then the question is like, are they ours? Are they theirs? Are they China's? Like, what's going on here, right? Um, and so that leads me to my third option here that's going on. There's the interdimensional aspect. There's the physical, non-human beings that are here. And the third aspect is this is just our technology. This is just us or the Russians or the Chinese, this advanced technology, anti-gravity stuff or stuff that, is wild to think about. It's technology like, whoa, we can do that. That's cool, like sci-fi stuff. But the real meat and potatoes of it, I think, is not ours, right? But I do think a percentage of, perhaps even a large percentage of the UAPs and UFOs that are seen in the sky at any given time are definitely ours. High tech stuff, top secret stuff, or the Chinese messing around with the Russians. Sure, sure, sure. I'm on board with all of that. But there's definitely a percentage of it that's smaller that is not ours, not human, and is unknown, I believe. And so I think that's what's so hard for these governments to admit. And that's why part of the reason they're being so quiet about it is because they don't know, right? These New Jersey drones, what's going on? Are we in trouble here? Should I be scared? Are we under attack? And I think part of the reason that the government is so quiet is because they don't know. They don't want to say they don't know. They don't want to admit they don't know because that would cause widespread panic. So what I think is going on here, and I think part of why disclosure is so difficult to get them to disclose and admit what they know is because they don't want to admit that they don't know anything, that they know barely anything. I think that's the big caveat here is they barely know anything. And this is echoed by people that are in the military, these high-ranking government officials. It's kind of this idea that like they don't really know what's going on. And they don't want to admit that because it would cause widespread panic. The government is supposed to be here to protect us. The government is supposed to be here to have some contingency plans in place. And I don't think that we do. I think that's part of the reason why Trump started Space Force because like he's trying to he knows something's there, right? There's been so many presidents that have talked about this topic and everybody just kind of laughs it off, but it's a thing, right? There's a story of Nixon going and visiting alien craft. There's Ronald Reagan, stories of him. I just heard about a story about how Steven Spielberg was doing a private screening of E.T. back in the 80s at the White House with a bunch of high-level military people and high-level government people watching the movie with Reagan at the White House before it came out into theaters. And the movie ended and everybody clapped and Reagan got up and said something along the lines of, "I know that many of you in this room know that that movie was very accurate as to what's truly going on this planet." And there was kind of like an awkward silence. Everybody kind of like was like, "Yeah, you're right." I guess. But he was deadly serious, and, Spielberg said he wasn't smiling at all and wasn't joking at all, and I'm just like, "Okay." Right? So these presidents have talked about it, and I don't think that all presidents have access to it. I don't think all presidents know what's going on, because I think that there are elements of the government that are, keeping these things secret and keeping it away from the president that's gonna be gone in 4 years, right? And they don't wanna blow a lid off this thing. So there's a financial aspect of it going on as well, where these aviation companies have a huge financial interest to have this high technology, this non-human tech. So they're making millions or billions off of it, and the government has an interest in keeping it quiet for national security purposes, right? If the Russians and the Chinese are also racing to crack the code of what this thing is and how to use it to their own benefit to take over the world, then it's a race, and nobody wants to reveal their secrets, right? But because of that, we're unable to bring in the best scientific minds. We're unable to collaborate globally or even nationally and have these people talk about it to get the best physicists from across the globe, to get the best, aviation experts from across, and say like, hey, let's all crack this thing together. But instead, it's very compartmentalized. These, the aviation people are kept over here. The physicists are kept over here. They're not allowed to talk to each other. They're not allowed to talk about what they've seen. It's all very compartmentalized, which is a problem scientifically for cracking this thing, right? So there's a money aspect to it as well. Um, so yeah, I think disclosure is more than just like, hey, guess what, guys? There's aliens on the planet. I think it's way beyond that and way deeper than that. There are religious aspects to it, right? I believe that the foundations of reality are sort of based on this. I think that the foundations of religion are based upon this. And I think that if true, 100% transparent disclosure were to come forth, it would be chaotic. And I like to think as an open minded person myself, like, hey, everybody would just be cool with it, right? Like, come on, man, it's 2026. Like, we've all seen the sci-fi movies. We're all cool with it. We listen to Joe Rogan, like these types of things. Like, yeah, I can wrap my mind around it. I like to think that most people will just be complacent about it. Like, okay, yeah, we have interdimensional beings. Like, cool. I still got to work my 9 to 5 job. Like, how does that what does that have to do with my life, right? Like, what do I care if there's gray aliens floating around, like stealing people for their eggs and sperm? Like, what do I care? But I think it goes beyond that. I think there's deeper meaning to this. I think it has to do with the fabric of our reality. It has to do with consciousness that we don't quite understand, but we're slowly getting there. Religion, physics. It's going to affect, global economies, global governments. If people can't trust the government to protect them from whatever it is, then why do we have you? Why are we paying you our tax dollars to have you protect us if you can't protect us? Like, what's going on here? So I think that's part of the reason why, out of self-interest, that these governments and these aviation companies aren't coming forth and telling the truth because it's just better that way, right? And then there's the component that it's not the government's call, that the phenomenon itself will reveal itself when it's ready to reveal itself, whether that's the gray aliens or the interdimensionals or the Watchers or the Nephilim or whatever, the Anunnaki, whatever it is that's around us at all times. I like to think that I'd be cool if I saw a gray alien, but the truth is if I opened the front door and saw one in the middle of the night, I'd shit my pants. It would scare the crap out of me, and I don't know. It would be traumatizing, I believe. So that's probably part of the reason is these beings are perhaps terrifying looking, and it's just best not to talk about it, right? And so perhaps they haven't revealed themselves like in Star Trek, the prime directive is to, not reveal yourself until that civilization is ready to understand that, there are other beings in the stars that have warp drive, et cetera. And so perhaps these beings are not revealing themselves to us because we're not at a high enough consciousness level, right? We're still too obsessed with wars and borders and ego and all of these types of things. And so perhaps we're not ready spiritually for that, right? It's interesting that the gray aliens specifically are very obsessed with our nukes, like I talked about at Roswell and stuff. There are so many reports, even today, hundreds, if not thousands of reports of these weird tic tac shaped craft that are appearing over military bases and power plants, nuclear power plants, around nuclear subs, around airplanes that are carrying nuclear material. And what happens is there's these reports of the craft disabling the nuclear missiles, disabling the nuclear sub, disabling all of the electronics on board whatever the human craft is, right? and they don't know how to stop it. They don't know what caused it. And it's just like blip, 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 and it disables all of our nukes, right? So whatever it is that's disabling the nukes is something that cares about this planet. There's often interactions with these gray beings that say, hey, you need to be careful with the planet. You need to be careful with these nukes. You need to be careful about the future of this planet, and your guys are trashing it. Now, that doesn't sound like somebody that's coming from another solar system, because why would they care about our planet? This sounds like something that is a being that is already living here, that has been here for quite some time, that has a vested interest in the future of this planet, right? And us on it and them on it at the same time, and us not blowing it to hell, right? The analogy that I like to think about is, those tribes that live in the jungle that have had little to no contact with the modern world, right? That are completely just wearing like leaves, leaf skirts, and spears to hunt their prey. You know what I'm talking about? And so I think that we are those primitive jungle people, for the analogy, right? That we are in our own little pocket here, and we think we're all modern. We think we're the height of technology, the height of civilization. We are peak mankind, right? And I think that there are beings outside of our little jungle that are far more advanced than us. And I think that that is the gray aliens. I think that that is the interdimensional beings. I think that there are other realms and layers to this whole earth, like the Russian nesting doll type of a situation. And so I think that they have the ability to visit us in our little pocket here, in our little jungle. It reminds me also of, what am I trying to say here? In the Marvel movies, the Black Panther, you know what I'm talking about. What are they freaking called? Their world. Anyway, their world is hidden, right? It's hidden from view because of technology, and they're on their own little world, and the outside world knows nothing about it. And I think that's what's going on here, is that we've been living side by side with these creatures and have no idea that they have this technology, right? It'd be like the people in the jungle looking up and seeing a Boeing 747 flying overhead and thinking that it's a craft of the gods. They have no idea what the hell they're looking at, because they have no frame of reference for what they're viewing, right? Maybe a piece of technology will float up on their shore, a piece of trash or something. They're like, what is this? This is from another world. We've never seen this before. What is this plastic? What is this? Whatever it is, right? I think that's what's happening. I think we are living alongside beings that have been here for quite some time, and they care about this world as much as we do. And I think there's a fun theory to think about, that some of these beings, not just the Greys, if you want to say that the Greys are perhaps future humans, then there's this idea that there's this previous advanced civilization that was here before the flood, right? You can call it Atlantis. When I first started hearing about Atlantis, I was thinking of, the underwater mermaids with, Triton spears, and like they're living in their own little community in underwater Atlantis. That's not what it is. What I believe Atlantis was a representation of a previous very advanced civilization, in the same way that we are very advanced with our technologies. I think that they had very similar technologies. Yes, I understand there isn't any evidence of, ancient quantum computers buried in the ground. I get it. But also we have explored, we barely scratched the surface as to what's underground here. We've literally haven't scratched the surface. We've only explored less than 10% of the oceans. This is where I think that the beings are hiding. We've barely scratched the surface on the literal surface in terms of exploring Egypt, or exploring these pyramids that are hidden under the jungles of Brazil and South America and Mexico. These pyramids are all over the planet. These ancient labyrinths, these crazy things that are just buried, that we have no idea that they're there. But now with modern technology, we can look into the ground a bit and see some of these and be like, oh shit, they're everywhere, right? So how much of this technology is just buried and we have no idea it's there? So I get that we don't currently have evidence, modern scientific, actual true evidence, but I believe that perhaps it's there somewhere, right? So I think that there was an ancient advanced civilization that got destroyed by the flood. I think that they, because of their own hubris, or because they pissed off the gods, or because they became too violent, or became whatever, it falls in line with all of these ancient stories of an ancient civilization. The Egyptians talked about the ancient civilization of Atlantis, and how they're far more advanced than the Egyptians were. And I think that the flood wiped out that civilization. Were they responsible for building many of these megalithic, monolithic pyramids and structures all over the globe? Perhaps, right? Now, I'm not saying that this Atlantis civilization was non-human. Perhaps it was, perhaps it wasn't. But let's just play it straight and say that they were just a highly advanced version of humans. So perhaps the Great Flood did not eliminate all of these Atlantean civilization. Perhaps some of them survived. Perhaps some of them went underground. Perhaps some of them went under the oceans and the water to continue their civilization. So if you think that our civilization now, modern civilization, has advanced so far and so quickly in 200 years, imagine what an ancient advanced civilization from 13,000 years ago would be if they had been continuing to advance for the last 13,000 years in hiding and secret out just outside of our periphery, just barely interacting with us, right? Oftentimes there's this talk, the main I don't like using the word aliens, but the main aliens, the main beings that people talk about are the gray aliens by far, number one. Number two is these Nordic aliens, these tall Norwegian, Nordic, they call them the tall whites, right? And these are beings that are almost angelic. They are telepathic. They're described as being the perfect looking human, that they're physically flawless and gorgeous with long blonde hair. They're all white skinned, blonde hair. They all look Nordic. And oftentimes in these interactions, the Nordics are sort of seen as overseers or in charge of these gray aliens. So these gray aliens are often seen as tools or AI of a sort, some sort of a biological cybernetic organism that isn't completely, alive, maybe, doesn't maybe have a soul, that they're just sort of there to be neutral and to be the tool of a higher being like the tall whites, these Nordic beings. And so I'm wondering if perhaps these tall beings, these Nordic whites, are remnants of the previous advanced civilization in the Atlantean age before the flood, right? And it started getting me thinking. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Hitler and the Nazis had, I hope this doesn't get me banned from YouTube for saying those words, but um, had an obsession with the Aryan race, right? Being white skinned, blue eyed, blonde haired. Perhaps he was obsessed with the occult and things of these nature, obsessed with UFOs, obsessed with going to Antarctica to see what was down there. Perhaps these beings are living in Antarctica. If you haven't looked into Antarctica, I highly suggest, if you're interested, look into it. There's a lot of weird shit around Antarctica. Perhaps I'll dedicate a whole episode to it, but there's a lot of weird shit that went down there with Admiral Byrd and the Nazis, and nobody's allowed to go down there at all. It's a no-fly zone, all this weird stuff. But perhaps they're living down there as well as underground, as well as in the water, right? But I find it interesting that Hitler was obsessed with this Aryan nation. Perhaps he knew that those were the gods. Perhaps those were the Anunnaki. Perhaps those were the higher beings, the interdimensionals, whatever label you want to put on it. Gods with a lower G. Maybe they were gods with an uppercase G that actually created us. Nobody really knows, right? But the fact that perhaps he was trying to get to this higher state of being genetically, to have everybody be Aryan, is to represent what he believed perhaps is the perfect man, the perfect being, based on this pre-flood Atlantean civilization. Do you follow me? It's also weird that today so many people revere blondes, right? When I was in Hawaii, we're all blonde, a lot of blonde in my family, and so my little brother and my one of my sisters had blonde hair. Anyway, when you go over to Asia with blonde hair, they go nuts. They grab their cameras and start taking pictures because they're just not used to seeing a little blonde haired kid, right? Also, the idea that the beautiful blonde, the idea the stereotype of like a Marilyn Monroe type figure, this beautiful blonde. There's just always been a reverence for blondes over the years. And not to say that, blondes or the white race is superior, any of that nonsense. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But I find it interesting that there's just sort of this subtext that's sort of built into our DNA, perhaps. And maybe it's just a modern invention. Maybe I'm just making shit up. I don't know. But I just find it interesting. And it seems to me like it all kind of connects to something that we don't quite fully understand, but that's just sort of in our consciousness as a whole globally, right? Um, that perhaps we know that these blonde beings are there and they're sort of starting to make themselves known more and more. Um, there's also the other races of beings besides the tall whites and the grays are often reported, the reptilians, of course, the good old shape-shifting reptilians that are allegedly the royal family or shape-shifting reptilians, etc. To be honest with you, I don't. I've heard reports of it, and I'm not completely convinced of it. I don't. That's where I like to be open-minded. I'm like, yes, sure, maybe there's reptilians on this planet. That wouldn't surprise me. Um, but I don't know. I'm not completely convinced. But the fourth one is these mantis beings that look like a praying mantis, that look insectoid. There have been hundreds and thousands of reports of these insectoid mantis that are also oftentimes alongside the gray aliens. So when I try to wrap my mind around it and put all the puzzle pieces together, I think that there's interdimensionals. I think that some of this stuff is just our human technology, and I think that there are non-human beings on the planet. So non-human beings on the planet could mean the Greys that I believe have been here since antiquity, but that also leaves open the door for non-human beings that are visiting from other galaxies and other planets. Like, I'm sure there's a bit of that going on as well, right? Just the random Klingon popping in and trying to battle us or something. So yeah, I find it all fascinating, and I think that we are getting closer and closer every day, every year to disclosure, to seeing more of this for what it truly is, and advancing ourselves as a species. And perhaps this is the end times, right? And not to say that in a scary way, like the world is going to blow up or the gods are going to destroy us, but um, I think that we are on the edge of a major paradigm shift, especially in conjunction. I think that it's all related. The phenomenon, the non-human beings, the interdimensionals. It's really ramping up and becoming part of the mainstream in conjunction with AI and quantum computers. I don't talk about quantum computers that much, but you guys, quantum computers are beyond our comprehension almost. It's these computers that use the multiverse to calculate things that would take modern supercomputers trillions upon trillions, literally, years to calculate. These quantum computers calculate things in a matter of minutes. And it's mind blowing. And it's like, I don't really get it. And even the top minds on our planet don't truly get it. It's weird. And I think it's all connected. I think that we are perhaps dabbling and playing with technology that we weren't meant to have, and perhaps that will be our downfall. Perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps this is all going to be good for humanity and finally lift us up to the level of our interdimensional brothers and sisters, and bring us to a new level of spirituality and opening up consciousness and discovering things that perhaps have been hidden for millennia, that we are now rediscovering as to who we are and what our place is in the universe. And I love every minute of it. And I love you. If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe and hit like, give me a thumbs up, and let me hear your comments. Give me a comment. What do you think about all this? What are your thoughts on the nature of what the hell's going on around here? Until next time.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun.